Let's talk a little bit about this article you guys have just posted in the Washington Post. These vulnerabilities came to light in the U.S. intelligence community reports. What exactly are the risks here that experts see, and how is Jared Kushner being viewed by these other countries?
Well, ordinarily when someone is applying for a security clearance, the natural questions that come up are, do they have foreign entanglements, business dealings? Do they have debts? So they're things that they're not disclosing. In this case with Jared Kushner, foreign officials saw the company debt that he had, his extensive business dealings, as places where they believe they could execute leverage over him. So it kind of answers the question, I think, of what exactly was it that as his clearance background check was going through, the potential sort of hotspots or vulnerabilities that were being found. And of course, we're finding too that his contacts that he had with foreign officials that he was not reporting were also creating problems for him. So these are kind of traditional pitfalls, if you will, that anybody going through the background a process of investigation, these would create red flags for such a person.
Because Michael Flynn, who served for about a month as the president's national security advisor, there was concern that he potentially could be blackmailed. Is that a concern as far as Kushner is concerned right now?
Well, traditionally, blackmail is a concern. We don't know precisely if that was the case here with Jared Kushner, and we don't have any evidence in our reporting right now that there was any kind of quid pro quo. But I think that the concern among the officials and people who we talked to was that would foreign governments try to appeal to his business interests, or in some way perhaps appeal to his debt that he had, or that his company, I should say, had on a building in Manhattan, and look for that as a point of influence or a point of leverage. When you're going through these background investigations, investigators look for, these scenarios that could be exploited. It doesn't mean they found evidence that they were, but you look for those places where somebody might try to blackmail or curry favor or engage in some kind of a quid pro quo.
Because it seems like one of the issues that you report on, we've reported on, was the enormous debt, maybe as much as $1 billion on that one building in Manhattan, 666 Fifth Avenue. Talk about that and how that fits into this downgrading of his security clearances.
Well, of course, the Kushner Companies has this large debt from this office building, 666 Fifth Avenue, which when it was acquired was the most money ever paid for an office tower. Kushner has divested out of this company, again, coming back into the government, but still we know that the company has been looking for foreign investors and other kinds of investors to help alleviate that debt. And specifically, this was coming up, we're told, when foreign officials were heard talking about Kushner, that he did have these financial issues and this debt, and could that create a point of influence or vulnerability for him? And again, these are the kinds of things that any normal person going through a security clearance, a debt, any kind of ordinary consumer debt, credit card debt, owing money to your mortgage company can be something that's a red flag. In this case, it was Kushner being connected to a rather large real estate transaction. We don't know precisely whether that was a flag raised in his clearance, but we do know that foreign officials were talking about this, and that these foreign contacts that he had while he was in the White House, were in this zone of concern for people when it came to his security clearance.
We reported last week, Wolf, that the special counsel team is asking questions in their interviews of people about Jared Kushner's and Jared Kushner's conversations with, for example, the Chinese, and whether he was mixing his business with his new professional life during the transition and trying to get funding, say, for some of his, like 666 Fifth Avenue, which was in some difficulty. And the question here, I think that they're trying to get to the bottom of was he doing something inappropriate? Was he naive in establishing these back channels, as he told us he was trying to do when he was filling out his clearance form improperly? And so there are all of these kinds of questions swirling about what Jared did and who he was talking to and why he said what he said. I mean, it's a question of, was there anything nefarious, or was he naive?
But this is the definition of a security risk.
Right.
Because if you are a business person who is in desperate need of funds, as Jared Kushner is, and you are negotiating with China or the UAE, governments that control enormous amounts of investment capital, and you need investment capital, Are you negotiating with them on behalf of the United States, or are you negotiating with them on behalf of your personal business needs? There's no way to sort that out, really, except denying someone a security clearance so you don't have that kind of risk in the first place.
And I think that's like the important 10,000-foot view here is that we are talking about one of the president's closest advisors, a person who is a member of his family who is married to his daughter, that foreign countries, that foreign officials believed could be compromised, or that they could put in a compromising position to serve their interests rather than the interests of the United States.
Sabrina, we did get a statement from someone representing Abby Lowell, Jared Kushner's personal attorney, quote, "We will not respond substantively to unnamed sources peddling secondhand hearsay with rank speculation who continue to leak inaccurate information." Let me read another line from this Washington Post report. The President's National Security Advisor, General H.R. McMaster, learned that Kushner had contacts with foreign officials that he did not coordinate through the National Security Council or officially report, the Washington Post says. The issue of foreign officials talking about their meetings with Kushner and their perception of his vulnerabilities was a subject raised in McMaster's daily intelligence briefings, according to current and former officials who spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss sensitive matters. The fear is if the U.S. was picking up information from these other countries in whatever way the U.S. could do it, and they were talking about using Kushner to their advantage, that's a huge problem.
It's absolutely a huge problem, and this goes back to a point that Sarah made. You have one issue here where he has not been using the appropriate channels, and you now have his security clearance downgraded, and it's hard to foresee how he can continue in his role where he has a vast foreign policy portfolio, and he would need access to a lot of that sensitive and classified information. And now you have this other reporting suggesting the vulnerability and the way he's been preyed upon by other countries. That was almost expected, I think, in some ways, when you had a president who put family members in these very influential senior roles within the White House, who, as Sarah noted earlier, do not have the traditional policy experience or political experience, frankly, to be serving in the highest office.
And just to underline how crazy this situation is, these are obviously based on intercepts. There is nothing more highly classified in the government than the National Security Agency intercepts. The only way now Jared Kushner can read these intercepts is in the Washington Post, because he doesn't have the security clearance to read the intercepts about him, except when they get reported in the news media.
And we know the special counsel has probably seen these because he's asking these kinds of questions of people who come in to see him about Jared Kushner.
And they have security clearances, the people who work for Mueller.
They do have security clearances. So, again, you have to ask the question. Here is Jared trying to establish so-called back channel with the Russians and who else, meeting with Russian bankers during the transition at Trump Tower, et cetera, and then dealing with Chinese officials. And, the question you have to ask is why? Why was he the point man, as he said? And what did he do as the point man? Did he know that he could not talk either in those conversations or in follow-up conversations about his private business affairs with people he was dealing with as a representative, even during the transition of the United States government?
Yeah. There's a line here that he was also talking apparently with senior officials from Qatar about possibly investing in some of his real estate projects. That's another serious issue. Let me, Sarah, read another couple lines from this Washington Post report. Officials in the White House were concerned that Kushner was, quote, naive and being tricked in conversations with foreign officials, some of whom said they wanted to deal only with Kushner directly and not more experienced personnel, said one former White House official. Quote, this is still from the Washington Post, Kushner has an unusually complex set of business arrangements and foreign entanglements for a senior White House aide, experts have said, but his behavior while in office has only drawn more scrutiny and raised concerns that he would be unable to obtain a final security clearance, which he needs to perform the many jobs Trump has entrusted to him, from negotiating foreign trade deals to overseeing a Middle East peace process.
I mean, that was our story last week.
Right. And we've reported, parts of this, and I think It is worrisome when you are, another official in the White House, if you're H.R. McMaster, if you are someone else who has been on the NSC, who has worked with these countries for a long time, to see Jared Kushner making these kinds of contacts directly, doing it outside of the scope that you normally would, not having the kind of staff that you normally would by your side to make these phone calls, because these are people who have worked with these countries for a long time. These are people who know how they operate. These are people who can raise the red flags when you say, I know we have this conversation to talk about something in the administration, about foreign policy, but they're going to try to bring up 666. They're going to try to bring up your business. And here's how we navigate away from that. And it seems like, based on this report, that Kushner did not want to use those avenues. He did not want to use those protections. He did not want those NSC officials participating in these phone calls. And I think that's part of the reason other countries were able to walk away with the impression that maybe he was naive in his behavior.
Early on in this whole Russia story, we reported about conversations between Russians bragging about Flynn and how they had great in with Flynn, and perhaps Flynn could be useful to them, et cetera, et cetera. And you always have to be careful about these intercepts, because people tend to brag with each other. I have a lot of influence and a lot of sway with this character and that character. So, we don't know what's in them. We don't know what they were saying. But the fact that they were saying it raises a lot of questions about what they believed their relationship was and what they believed they could give him in exchange for something else. And that's the question that goes back to the security clearance issue, which is, as Jeffrey says, you can't do it while this investigation is ongoing.
The suggestion is maybe he was just naive or being tricked. He didn't come in, as you correctly point out, Jeffrey, with a lot of diplomatic experience, a lot of experience in the intelligence community, in national security affairs. He was a real estate guy in New York.
Well, we have an intern program at the White House for people who are not inexperienced and they can, get up to speed on things. Monica Lewinsky was in the program. But Jared Kushner was not in the intern program. He was in a very high-level post in which he remains. So I don't really think it's a very sympathetic argument that, he was new to the job, he didn't really know anything, so we should sort of cut him a break. That's for the internship program, and we don't put the interns in charge of, say, negotiating Middle East peace, which is apparently still, to this day, Jared Kushner's job.
Or reading the presidential, or having access, I should say, the presidential daily brief.
It'll be interesting to see what the president has to say about all this, if he tweets anything about it, if he reacts at all.